are in Illustrator having all these nice element in different layers. Actually, let me pull this out. Oops. So funny, I have so much stuff. Let me go in a workspace that maybe I don't have as much stuff, like Essential. Essential doesn't have a whole lot. That sometimes can be a problem, but for this is good. Because you see that you have less palettes in the workspace Essential. By the way, if you ever want to switch workspaces, window, workspace. So if you don't see certain tools, Essential Classic has a whole lot of tools. If you are going to work with a lot of typography, then you would want to go in this workspace. Web, this workspace. These are really neat workspaces, by the way. So we have different objects in each layer. Dots, the lines with the, little doodles on it, the squares, they're all separated, and all of these needs to go into Photoshop. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to select, for example, the background. I guess I could select the background too. Why not? The background is just a square. One thing I want to do though is I want to make sure that the Photoshop and Illustrator match in size. So do you guys see this little icon right here? It's called the Artboard tool. If you double click, it'll tell you how big is your composition. It's 1845 by 2000. So let's do that. Let's pixels, obviously. It's a little bit less than 2000, but let's call it 2000. So now with my great luck, I cannot get out of it. Gosh. So the get out of this is at the bottom, and I'm cut out. Gosh, it's crazy. All right then, lucky me. Anyway, because of the projector, it kind of creates sometimes these situations. So I am basically selecting the background by clicking on this little loop and do Command C on the keyboard. I'm going to go in Photoshop, and I create a new file that is 1845 by 2000. You guys remember we just looked? Now make sure that it's 72 in resolution pixel per inch, because we are not doing anything that needs to be printed. And I'm going to use actually a RGB color mode, and that's kind of all I need. I'm going to say create. So now Command 0, so I can see it. In fact, maybe I'm going to do Command minus, so I see it a little bit differently. I know that somehow part of my screen is cut out. I hope it's okay. So I did Command copy. So what happens if right now, notice what happens in the layers. I'm going to try to minimize it a little bit, to shrink it a little bit, so you can see the whole thing. There we are. So move it up. So right now, what happens if I do Command V? It will ask me if I want to paste it as pixel, path, shape layers, and for the purpose of this, pixel is totally fine, right? You could have choose Smart Object to keep a vector, but we're going to go in After Effects later on, and for the purpose of this, it doesn't matter much. We're going to just leave it as pixels. As I said, either one, pixel or Smart Object, if you prefer to, keep vector. I'm going to leave it like that. Oops. What happened? Sorry, I thought I had selected only the background, so let me go back in here. Did I select just the background? Sometimes it's nice to isolate the background, because that means that's all you see, right? Another thing I can do to just recreate the background is to double click on here, look at the color, 128, 158, 73. Try to help me remember that, 128, 158, 173. So I go in here, double click, and RGB is 128, 158, and 173, right? I could do this too, to just recreate the background and say okay. I need to double click on this background to unlock it if I want to put the color, and that means I double click on this gray area, not on the name, not on the thumbnail, not on the lock. I just right here, and I say okay. Then I'm going to do Command A for select all, and Option Delete for fill with the foreground color. So I recreated the background. Now I can do Command D. Now let's go back in Illustrator though and see why we cannot select isolated element. For example, if I want to copy the duodecis, I should be able to click on this little loop. They're selected. I do Command Copy, and then I go in Photoshop, and I do Command V, or even Edit Paste in Place. Let's see. I'm gonna say okay, and there it is. Sorry, earlier maybe accidentally I had everything selected, and I did not realize that. I thought I had just the background. You need to hit return, right? You see this X on it? You need to hit return so that you confirm that you want it in there. So you do the same for every one of the Illustrator layers. After the doodles, you can turn it off, turn on the dudes, and select the dudes and say Command copy. Now notice that yes, Advaita.
When I copy and paste from Illustrator to Photoshop, it like resizes each item.
I'm going there, hold tight. So the only problem that will happen, guys, is that it will, you see how the dudes basically are outside of the Illustrator artboard, and they're a certain scale. So whenever you do Command copy and you go in Photoshop, what it's going to do is it's going to resize it to make it fit inside the artboard. Look at this, okay? You see that now the dudes are all fitting inside the artboard? Do you guys see that? That means what it does, it thinks that you actually want the whole thing, because Photoshop thinks different than Illustrator, right? Illustrator has this idea, or it has this prerogative actually, that the artboard can finish here. That means the area you print can end right here, but the graphics extend past. Photoshop doesn't have that. So what Photoshop does is assumes that you want the whole shebang, and obviously places the whole shebang inside of the canvas. So what you need to do is, yes, you need to rescale it. So what you want to do here is hold, and you don't need to hold the Shift key in Photoshop actually. You want to kind of look at Illustrator. I'm going to go back to Illustrator and see how much of the head of the dude I see here. I just see from the eyebrows up, and here you see from kind of like the top of the head down. So I'm just going to kind of match it in Photoshop. Did that answer your question? Advaita, did that answer your question a bit?
Yeah.
You basically have to kind of match it more or less as best as you can. Now the alternative, what was the alternative? Was to go in Illustrator and do a clipping mask and cut out what, you know, was outside of the artboard, and at that point the two were gonna match. But I think it's just easier to do this because it's not something that has to be incredibly accurate. We're not doing a mechanical drawing. Yes?
Will it work the same if you export the Illustrator file as a Photoshop file?
I guess I can do that too. It doesn't keep the layers. I did not think about doing that. Let me try. If I go in Illustrator and I actually turn everything on, good point. File, export, and you do as, and you choose PSD. Let me try. I actually did not even think about it because I generally do it like this. Remember, guys, I'm a bit of a control freak, and I feel like I have more control like this. But it sure is easier, right, if we do that. If we could save the layers. Now I'm looking if there is any place where it says keep the layers, but it might. I'm going to switch to RGB. I'm going to switch to 72. Oh, yeah, I don't want a flat image. You say that's a problem. I want to write layers. How do I write layers? I guess I need to leave it as CMYK. I can always turn it later if I want to. So leave it as CMYK, and that's fine. In fact, you know, color spaces these days, you know, there is color management, so it doesn't matter that much. Everything gets translated very easily. And let me say, okay. Sure. Okay, let's go in Illustrator and open it, and that will save us having to do the translation that I was trying to do just because, as I said, I'm a bit of a control freak. Let me hit return just in case I need to go back to this one. Okay, let me go in week 7 and open what I just did, this one, in Photoshop. Open with. Yeah, the only issue is that it does what I was telling you is trying to capture the whole thing, but it's actually no big deal because you can always crop it, right? You can go in the crop tool here and cut it off. The only issue I see, this is why I did it the other way. Now I remember. The only issue I see is everything is in folder. That has a bunch of groups inside of groups. Do you guys see do you guys see this, guys? It's crazy. So if you go in square with lines, what it does, you have to open the folder. Inside the folder, I bet there is a group for the lines, a group for the dots, a group. No, actually, Wait a minute. Square with line has a little head here? I didn't think it did. So anyway, so no, we cannot do this. Simply because we actually, for After Effects, when I import in After Effects, I need to have straight layers, simple layers. I don't want to have folders inside of folders. Now, yes, I could purge the stuff, right? I can open up all these and pull things out of the group. I'm actually happier just going and doing what I was doing before. But if you actually want to go this route and kind of pull everything out of these folders, so that you don't have subfolders, you have everything like this. Everything is at the level of the layer, like this. If you can do that, either way, I'm going to continue to do what I was doing because I think it's just easier. It takes it's a matter of doing command copy, command paste 6 times. That is not that big of a deal. So thanks for the suggestion, though. It's always good to try new things, right? So now I just realized that this, you see, that's another thing that is, this one is inside square and lines, and it should be inside, oh, no, these little faces are inside square and lines, so we're good. So what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to select all of these and do command copy, and again, go in Photoshop and do command V and scale it a little bit bigger, because these also go outside of the canvas. And again, don't need to hold the shift key in Photoshop. You do in other software. I don't know why Adobe has double standards, but in Photoshop you don't need to hold the shift, but in Illustrator and InDesign you do. But that's pretty good. Actually, it's very, very similar to what I have in Illustrator in terms of size. It's nice to go back and forth, though. Let me see how much of her we see down here up to the eyes of the little dudettes. So I'm going to do that in Photoshop as well. I'm going to move it down. Probably it's more like a matter of moving it down than scaling it at this point. Yeah, perfect. Okay, so let's go back in Illustrator and get, so we got the background, the square and the lines. Let's see, did we get the dots? Let's go with the dots, command copy. And let me go in Photoshop. Yep. And to do edit paste or edit paste in place. Even better. Paste in place is better because it keeps it where they're supposed to be. Even though, are they exactly in the same spot? Let me see. No, they're a little bit higher actually. They're kind of where the nose of the dude is up here. So yeah, I'm doing a little maneuver to get it to match, but it's no big deal. There we are. They need to be a little bit higher up. There we are. Okay, and then so we still need the lines, and then I think we're done, right? Yeah, the lines right here. Sorry. Command copy, and then I'm going to go to Photoshop, Command V. Sorry, I said D for some mysterious reason. Okay, edit paste in place instead of Command V. Actually, it's better is Shift Command V, so it keeps in the same spot. Now, really, is a little bit. Those lines were bigger in Illustrator, so we just need to kind of get it to be a little bit larger. Not a lot. There we are. I think I missed actually on this side one of the lines. That's all right, no big deal. It's the white, one of the white lines is missing. It might be in a different, is on the background layer. Shoot, that's all right. Or sorry, let me find out where it is. By the way, in Photoshop, if you have if you click with the if you have auto select checked and you click on something, it will jump to the layer. No, actually it is in the right place. It's just the line got out of whack. It's supposed to be the white line in between the other or really close to the other, and it's actually not close, but that's all right. Let's keep it this way. Another thing, so I'm in Photoshop. I have all my pieces. The only thing missing, I don't know how it's going to look though, is that, do you remember that paper texture? So I'm going to go and say File, open. I'm going to open that paper texture in the week 7 tutorial and try to add it because it's something that the tutorial on Canvas asks you to do. So I'm going to try to kind of like, first of all, I'm going to do image size, make sure I scale it to, wow, 6,000. Do you remember how big it was? 1845, I believe, by 2,000. So it's even too big. I'm going to say okay. I'm going to go and say image canvas size. And I'm going to say that I want it to be 2,000 in height. And I will clip it to that exact size. Say sure. And I'm going to do Command A, Command Copy, and I'm going to bring it on top of the background here, Command V. Now, because it makes things a little bit harder to read, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move the layer up so you can see it. I'm going to use a blend mode. So I'm going to make it a multiply or something so I can still see the blue in the back. I don't know if multiply is the right one. Let's see what I like. Oh, color burn is pretty cool. Let me see. Sorry, I'm checking which blend mode actually makes it more interesting. So that's all up to you because I know your composition is different than mine. That's pretty cool too. Really jazzy. Ooh, let me go with, there was one that I really like. Sorry, I'm gonna go. Let's go with color burn. So you can still see the blue. Now, just to reduce the amount of layers before I bring it into, first of all, I need to save, right? Now that I did all this work, I'm gonna save it on my computer. 1 second, Andre, I'll be with you. Let me save it so I make sure I don't mess it up. That means sometimes I forget to save it, and then if things crash, you really regret it. It means I've done enough work here. So I'm gonna call it week 7 tutorial 2, okay? So I have it. Yes, Andrea.
When you did the color burn, what layer did you do it
To the top layer. Because the blending modes, the way they work is they blend the layer above with the layer below. So if this guy had been below the blue and I did the blend, it would have done nothing because there was nothing underneath it. So you have to have something underneath, and the blend mode will allow you to blend those two layers, the one that you're acting on and the one just below it. Thanks for asking. All right, so what I was trying to tell you though, do you remember how we want to have 6 layers? So when in, do you have a question, Paul?
Yeah, I was wondering where you got the paper.
Unsplash. I went unsplash.com and I clicked on paper. Guys, you don't necessarily have to do it for this demo. I just added it in there because the tutorial makes you do it, and I feel like, hey, I'm going to try to follow what the tutorial tells you to do every step. But for the purpose of this demo, what I'm trying to do is just show you how do you go from that Illustrator composition you did all into Photoshop in a pretty easy manner just by copying and paste a special in place. And then I want to show you how do you go to After Effects. The idea is to keep the layer to the minimum. So these 2 layers, 0 and 6, really you don't need to have 2 there. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to hold the Shift key, and click so that the 2 of them are selected. And then I'm going to go under Layer, Merge. So now I have just 1 layer in there because I don't really need 2. And I'm going to call it Background. There we are. Oops. I called it background. Oopsie doopsie. The O became a P. There we are. So now I could be really good about naming everything. So I'm going to go back in here and call them dudes. Dudeses. This guy is the dudes. You know what I mean? I kind of like to be incredibly organized just because it generally really pays off. Squares and little people, LP. Or little heads. This one is the dots, and then the rest are the lines. So I kind of learned that it pays off if you're organized, especially if you do, you know, like I love animation, CGI animation and Maya and all the VR stuff. And you have so many moving pieces in bigger projects that is really nice to be organized. So it's kind of important to start early. You know, even if the bigger project is what benefits the most from being organized, I would start now, right? All right, so I'm going to say Command S, save it, and now we can go in After Effects. So what I'm going to do is I don't need Illustrator anymore, And I'm going to say Command S, and even though I don't think I changed it much, I'm going to quit out of Illustrator. And then I'm going to go and find After Effects. So in After Effects, I need to tell you, my After Effects is my go-to when I do compositing. That is, when I film something that has green screen or blue screen to map the color out, or when I create something in Maya and I render it as images or as little chunks of video, and then I composite it together in After Effects. My point is, I use After Effects, but not necessarily for this purpose, even though it is incredibly well suited for doing animation. So I'm not a master at animation with After Effects. I'm just telling you that, you know, if the other software I've been using now for 20 years, that is Photoshop, Illustrator, InDesign, Maya, this one I haven't used for 20 years to do especially this type of work. So when you launch After Effects, it looks like this, and I'll show you what all the pieces are for. I like to kind of move this down. This is the timeline where eventually you'll see all those layers that we separated in Photoshop. The very first step you want to do is, I generally don't even bother creating file, new composition, blah, blah, because when you bring something into After Effects, it will eventually turn it into a composition. It doesn't have any other way to go. So what I generally do is I go down here and I click and say Import File. Now before I go anywhere else, I want to make sure all of you have After Effects turned on. And then you can see what I see, in which at the very top there is project. Down here there's, I mean, all of them now are empty, right? There's nothing open. So that's cool. It's fine, no problem for now. Now you could, if you wanted to, click on here and say New Composition, and go File, New Project. I mean, you could do all kind of stuff. But I repeat, you can simply right mouse click and say Import Files, and it will make a composition from what you import on its own. If you want to change the settings, I'll show you how right after we do this. So you need to browse to what we just created. How did I call it? Week 7 to something, right? Let me see if there it is, right here. So I need to browse to what I just made. And you can click on Create Composition if you want, and say Open. I'm surprised it takes so long. Oh, no, it doesn't. For some reason, this was moved out of the way. Jedi opens in front of you. Don't ask me why. So what you want to do is you make sure you don't choose Merge Layer Styles into Footage. Just go into Editable Layers. And up here, make sure you choose Composition, Retain Layer Sizes. So what this allows you to do is to retain your layers as they are. Because remember, we're going to animate those layers. So we do want them separated. So if you look, what it did here is, sorry, for some reason it got still what I did yesterday. The stuff here, you see that there are 2 of them. For some reason, I made 2 of them. Don't ask me why. I can obviously delete one of the 2. It's no problem. But if you go down here and you open, you'll see all your layers are there. Now, I don't know why it called them. Oh, no, actually, it's just that I would say the name is, it seems to have called it all background, but it's okay, it's no problem. So what I want you to do is, this is the very background, and that has to be at the very bottom of your stack. So what I'm going to do right now is, I guess we can move it later. What I want you to do is grab these and move them down onto the timeline. And you'll see that it creates the background, and then you move all the other pieces. You'll see it, eventually you need to move the background at the bottom because it will cover everything up. But it's no problem. I'm just moving everything down here. I could click, by the way, shift click and move everything down too. I just right now did it this way, either way. So you need to eventually take that top one that you brought in and move it to the bottom. So that blue square needs to be at the bottom of everything. You can see that you have everything else all ready to go. You have the squares and little people, the lines, the dudesses, and the dude. And what is this? And the dots. I was saying, I forgot I had the dots. As you can see, not only created here the names, it is really neat, but down here it showed you, these are all your layers across time, right? This is the timeline, so it shows you that is 20 seconds. 20 seconds is what I set up yesterday, so it's just keeping the probably same setup. If yours is 30 and you want to change it, what you can do is go on composition and composition settings. I don't know why it opens it to the side, but that's no problem. Here you can set the size of your canvas is already set to what I imported. Do you remember why earlier I said you could go and create a new composition and specify everything, or you can just import the file and it will create a composition for you that is taking all the properties from that file that you imported. That's why I did it that way. It was just a bit faster, right? So what you're saying is, how big is it? Now, how many frame per rate? What's the length? So if here you have 30, just change it to be 20. The very last 4 digit should be 20 and then 00 after the semicolon. Now, one thing that is important to keep in mind is this black color is actually not something that helps you. That is, if you set a color, let's say we did not have the background and we set the color in After Effects through this, when you export it, that background color does not actually show. So this background color is not for the project, but it's just a display within After Effects. Basically, you choose in After Effects what you want to see in the background. But again, once you export it, it doesn't matter. So you would have to create a background. That is why it's important that we have a background in the first place. Now, if you didn't have the background, what you could do is right mouse click here and choose solid somewhere. Right here, where is it? Solid. You can go new solid, and it will create a layer in which you can specify a color. In our case, we don't have a color. We have that weird papery texture. That is why we brought it in. Someone had, yeah, do you have a question?
I think I figured.
Okay, thank you. All right, so now what do we do next? How do we animate all these pieces? Now, if you open these little arrows, each of these layers have a transform option. These are the dots, by the way. And you can click on transform, and here you can see you can change all kind of stuff like position, scale, rotation, opacity, even the anchor point. Anchor point is the location, this is the anchor point in our case, is the center of the canvas. We have learned anchor points when we did Illustrator, for example, when you want to do a reflect. Do you remember there's a little anchor in the middle that you've got to move to the axis of the reflection? That's kind of the anchor point. I generally animate position, scale, rotation, and opacity a whole lot. I haven't really played with anchor that much. So the key in any animation software is to have an initial keyframe set, and then you go to where you want a change to occur, make the change. In the case of After Effects, in the minute in which you make the change, it will record the change for you. So it creates that keyframe. In other software, you have to actually hit a button to get that keyframe to exist. But let me show it to you. That is easier. So for example, let's say that for the dots, we're going to animate the position. So at frame, right now we're at frame 0 at the very beginning location. What you want to do is you go under position, and you guys see this little stopwatch right there. If you click on that, you notice it creates a little rhomb there. That's the key, or the keyframe is the right word, is basically saying, okay, the dots are at the frame 0 in this exact location. What I'm going to do next is I'm going to go to frame, for example, 10, right here. And I'm going to say, okay, I have frame 10, and I'm going to actually, you can use the right mouse button and slide on top of this spot, and it will move the dots out of the way, like this. Or if you want to, you can use shift arrow keys, and as you can see, the dots also move. It's up to you if you want to do it by clicking and sliding on these number, or using the arrow keys on your keyboard. It's totally up to you. You notice though that whatever we did, it created another keyframe right there. You see that? It basically recorded the change to the point that if right now I scroll with my timeline, this is the beginning, this is the end, or actually the middle of my timeline. Now I'm going to go all the way to the end of my timeline, and I'm going to bring the dots back. So I'm going to go back, and I wish I had remembered the beginning when we started where they were, but I'm going to eyeball. You know what I mean? The good news about going with this number is that if it said 1900, that I believe is the case, you just type that number, and now you know that they're going to be back exactly where they needed to be. I did not think about that until now. I apologize. I was so caught in telling you how After Effects works. So let's say they're here. Totally fine. And as you see, it created another keyframe right there. let's do another one just for fun. I mean, you can do anything you want. You can say, I'm gonna animate this time these are the dudesses, I think. No, the dudes. Okay, sorry. I'm gonna open, transform, and let's say I'm gonna rotate them. So I can click on rotation. Oops, sorry. Before you do that, make sure you know where your timeline is. We want to be on 0 at first, right? And now that I'm on 0 and I know I'm on the dudes, click on the dudes, and then go under rotation here and click the rotation. Then you can go on, and now look at the rotation. I guess is 0, 0. It's easy to remember. Right now, from now on, every time I make a change, I look at the initial positioning or initial state, so I can go back to the initial state. So now, with the dudes, I can go in here and say, okay, what if I rotate them, oops, 90 degrees. There we are. Or you could click on here and type 90. It works just the same. And then I'm going to go to the back, to the end, and rotate them again 180. So they pretty much go back to where they were. Ooh, no, they're upside down. Oh, I love that. Let's keep them upside down. I like that. Sorry, we could go all the way to 360 and have them go back to where they were, but I kind of like them upside down. So let's do another one. Let's do the opacity for dudesses. So go back with your timeline to frame 0. Always remember to go back to frame 0. Sometimes I forget. Believe it or not, I set keyframes where they don't belong, but it's easy because you can grab them and move them. That's a good news too. I'll show you in a minute. So this time I'm going to go with opacity for the dudesses. And I'm going to go to frame 10. And I'm going to say that the opacity that is now 100% should be, oops. Actually, I'm going to type 50%. And then I'm going to go to frame 20. And I'm going to go back to 100. So now you can see if you scroll on your timeline, then things are happening. The dots are moving, the dudesses are changing in opacity, and et cetera, et cetera. So the idea here is to just, plan. The difficult part in this exercise is both to plan in tutorial 1, how is this composition, which pieces go in it. And in the tutorial 2, in this part, is to plan the motions, how to make it kind of interesting, and maybe give it a repeating motion or something. I'm not sure. Now, remember that, like I said, and by the way, this tool allows you to zoom in and out of the timeline. It means hone it closer if you need to look at frame. If you want something to happen at frame 4, then you can, it's hard to see it when you're zoomed out. Right, you don't see 4 right there, but right here you can zoom in and hone it down to whatever you want. But remember that it's kind of really neat that you also can go in there and say, hey, look, I want to move this keyframe to be somewhere else. You really drag it around, as you can see. So you can fix whatever you did that you realize, oh gosh, I actually want. You can really do all kind of stuff. It's a fabulous software. You can, if you right mouse click, you can edit the value. You can kind of like, I'm looking at keyframe assistance. Oh, yeah. Ease in and ease out. It creates kind of a really nice, like when you're thinking about a bouncy ball and the movement and how before it hits the ground, it, slows down a little bit. That's a, easing in and out is when you create kind of a neat effect just before stopping or starting. So I'm going to stop the recording because the purpose of this exercise at this point is to kind of play with what do you do animation-wise, is kind of plan it and then go and try to do it. And one last thing I want to tell you about this window that is really neat is that you can, right now we're viewing at 16%. There might be time in which you want to go in and zoom in. Remember, this is a great tool to zoom in and out. So there are a whole lot more things to After Effects, but I'm kind of trying to keep it simple too. Like here, you can actually create content. This toolbox allows you to create content as well. For the sake of today, just keep it simple and just play with the layers we created, and then the next exercise we can build, more. I'm going to stop the recording, answer your question, and come around and look at your work.